The Ragdale Ring is known today as a summer performance series and a design contest hosted by the Ragdale Foundation in Lake Forest, Illinois. Few people know that the ring was once a permanent structure built by Howard Van Doren Shaw at Ragdale after being inspired by a garden theater he saw while touring Italy with his family. By retracing Shaw's visit to Italy, we can see how he adapted and updated a Baroque theater design to meet the needs and aesthetic of an early 20th century American audience. The story begins in the summer of 1908 when Howard Van Doren Shaw and his wife Frances took their daughters, Evelyn and Sylvia, ages 15 and 11, on their first family trip to Europe. We know they sailed on a ship called the Cedric, and the trip featured stops in England, Paris, Venice, Siena, and Rome. From the photos that survive, we see they traveled through Italy by motor car and spent some time in the countryside, visiting villas and gardens. At some point, they must have learned about the 17th century Villa Gori, with its mysterious gardens, located just outside the medieval town of Siena, and decided to visit it. The villa was known for its garden labyrinth and the outdoor theater, all connected by covered pathways created out of thickly woven trees. The concept of the garden and outdoor theater must have intrigued Howard, who was busy creating his own garden at Ragdale and interested in the idea of creating an open-air venue for his wife's plays. The interior of the house, seen here as filled with Renaissance and Baroque antiques, unfortunately no longer exists. The villa was mistakenly bombed in World War II by the Allied forces, who intended to destroy the nearby Sienese train station, which had been taken over by the German army. The facade of the villa, and luckily the garden, weren't damaged in the bombing, and the rest of the house was later rebuilt. The exterior of the villa has two great tunnels. One is perpendicular to the facade and leads to a circular labyrinth made of boxwood, and the other, almost 400 feet long, extends out from the side of the villa and culminates in an egg-shaped theater made of trees and hedges. The tunnels were made from holm oaks, masterfully pruned and trained to interweave into an overhead archway, creating a dark, cool space on a hot summer day. The long walk out to the theater would have provided an intimate and liminal space for 17th century audiences to enter into the other world of the theatrical performance. From the middle of the tunnel, the open space of the theater is seen as a dazzling light at the end. A little closer, and the pool of bright light comes into focus as the audience descends down a few steps onto a swirling arabesque pavement filled in with colored gravel. The stage is set on the elevated half of the ellipse and has 4 sets of wings made out of hedges. The whole theater is surrounded by holm oaks, and one large cypress tree provides a focal point at the top of the ellipse. I imagine that Howard must have been enraptured by the transformative space of Villa Gori's outdoor theater. By creating his own version of this concept, he could unify his skills in architecture with his family's talents in acting, poetry, playwriting, and music. The theater would become a centerpiece for Ragdale, which was already becoming a sanctuary retreat for the family's creative friends. Once the Shaws returned home from Europe, Howard immediately began building the garden and theater, planting the trees and hedges into what would become the Ragdale Ring. 4 years later, in 1912, the ring was finally ready for its first performance. Shaw intended to recreate Villa Gori's tunnel effect at Ragdale by having the audience start their journey to the ring at the columned entrance to the garden. The path is lined by arbor vitae trees, and once the attendees crossed the cow lane, the last 50 feet of their journey took them under a pleached allée made from hawthorns, providing the similar effect of coming out of a tunnel into a lighted space. Unfortunately, this part of the ring no longer exists, and we know from Frances's writings that Howard had a difficult time getting the trees to interweave. Like its Italian counterpart, the audience area is 3 feet below the stage level and surrounded by a retaining wall. The raised stage slopes gradually upwards with wings made of densely planted arborvitae. But Shaw's Ring is also very much its own creation. Possibly under the influence of landscape architect Jens Jensen, who was known for his council rings, Howard changed the oval shape into a large circle with a retaining wall 70 feet in diameter. He discarded the Baroque arabesque ground pattern and instead positioned the dramatic emphasis overhead with a sophisticated lighting system. Some 50 amber-colored Chinese lanterns, fitted with electric bulbs, typical of contemporary local fairgrounds, were strung on wires around the ring. The stage was lighted with floodlights, consisting of metal troughs containing 12 60-watt bulbs in combinations of red, white, blue or red, white, green, and were located behind the ornamental columns, behind the third row of wings, and in the shrubbery in the back of the stage. The 24-foot wide by 90-foot deep stage had 3 planes of light, each potentially imbued with different lighting combinations. All the lights were controlled by a dimmer, so any part of the scene could be changed gradually from darkness to light. Electric lighting had only just arrived at Ragdale 5 years earlier, so Shaw's lighting effects were a mesmerizing highlight of every performance. Even Frances jokingly recognized her husband's prowess, referring to him with a capital H, master of the sun, moon, and stars, by a turn of his wrist. The ring's secluded, intimate space offered a magical alternate reality for the lucky audience members. The ring held many successful events, some even with audiences of up to 300 people. Frances was the playwright, convincing her children and friends to participate, and her plays had titles like In the Pasha's Garden and The Heir of Manville Grange. Poets Carl Sandburg and Vachel Lindsay were friends of the Shaws and are said to have attended plays at the Ragdale Ring. Harriet Monroe, a friend of Frances Shaw and founding editor of Poetry magazine, is said to have brought William Butler Yeats to a ring performance when he visited her in Chicago. After Howard died in 1926, the ring was seldom used, and in 1937, Shaw's daughter Evelyn and her husband John T. McCutcheon built a home on the site, partially destroying the ring. After a long hiatus, in 2013, executive director Jeffrey Mewson launched an international competition to reinterpret Shaw's Ring as a temporary experimental environment. This annual competition provides artists, architects, and designers with the unique opportunity to devise and construct a performance venue and gathering place on the historic Ragdale campus. Each summer, the ring is filled once again with world-class performers who entertain their audiences with music, storytelling, puppetry, dance, and more. The evenings are filled with warmth and a sense of community. As Frances Shaw once said, "The only villain in our performances is the weather." 2022 marks the 10th year of the design competition and summer performance series. The milestone carries with it some exciting news. Evelyn Shaw McCutcheon's house and property, which was sold off many years ago, has recently been repurchased by Ragdale and is now being integrated back into the campus. The house, with its stunning views overlooking the prairie, will host artists in residence, and the original Ragdale Ring will be consolidated and reactivated for future audiences to explore and enjoy.